have the ability to follow up later. So welcome to this eligibility training for new ADs. I know that you've met me already, but I'll just reintroduce myself. I'm BJ Kuntz at the WIAA office. We have 3 members to our eligibility team. Myself, my coworker Justin Kesterson, who's on the TV here with us, and downtown Sam Brown. She's here as well. So the 3 of us make up the eligibility team. I'll tell you from the very beginning, it is beneficial when you have a question that you need answered, that you kind of email all 3 of us, because that way we can make sure we get back to you in a timely manner. We also know that doesn't always happen, but we do like to work as a team. And so it helps if we're all kind of in the loops together on those kind of things. So we're super excited to offer you this training. We're going to do our best not to make it feel like you're drinking from a fire hose, but eligibility is a really big, it's a big project. And I can't emphasize enough that this is one piece that you want to kind of take a step back and make sure you do it right from the beginning. It's a lot harder to manage if you're being reactive. Eligibility is something you really want to be proactive on and get ahead of and have systems in place. So I am going to share my screen. I'm also going to dump that's exactly what I'm sharing with you. I'm going to throw it in the chat. So, and it's a Word document. So if you want to download it and take your own notes, you're welcome to do that. But I will also share the screen so we have a place to kind of talk from here. So, if you have questions, feel free to throw them in the chat, and Justin and Sam will sort of monitor that as well as I, just to help make sure that if we have questions, we're answering them. I already introduced us, Justin, Sam, and I, for eligibility. So Justin, we're going to let you kind of set the stage. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, thanks, BJ. And first off, just welcome to everybody for taking on this role and becoming a part of our association if you haven't been a part of it as a coach or administrator from before. So just welcome and congratulations on all your new positions for this upcoming school year. So as BJ talked about, right, eligibility is a very large component of this position, and it's a key component to the job that you're going to be doing. And what I want to talk about is just the eligibility piece of every participant, every season, and every 3 to 6 weeks. So that every participant piece is just about ensuring that you check over every student athlete that is going to be a part of your program, whether they're a 4-year starter or a 4-year participant at your school, or if it's a new student that's coming in. You want to make sure that the first thing you're doing is checking every student that has registered through whatever your registration process is, whether that's Family ID, Final Forms, any of the other programs that are out there. You're making sure that every student athlete is being checked off and that they're hitting every single mark. So that's kind of the first step, is just ensuring that they have all the paperwork that's needed, and that they are checking off all the boxes for eligibility to be able to participate in interscholastic athletics at your school and activities. And then the every season piece is just talking about that, doing that consistently over the 3 seasons. So again, you have kids that are going to be common participants in your school and within your programs, but that you're double checking their eligibility before every single season before they begin participating, because things change, whether they've moved or whether their physicals are out of date. Those are things that you want to be checking on. So as you go along during the school year, it's beneficial to keep those records. I always kept mine in my office, just so that it was always with me and I knew where to find them. That way I didn't have to go chase things down. And the nice thing is with most of these registration programs now is that a lot of the information being electronic, you can set up prompts to where it will ping you if a student athlete's physical's out or getting ready to expire, and then you can get those communications out. But you want to make sure that you're doing that every single season, because as I said, things can change. And the last thing you want to do is rely on the fact that you think that this kid's is going to be good for the entire year, and then something happens in the spring season and they're ineligible, and then all of a sudden you're submitting a violation report due to the fact that you thought that the kid's physical was good for the entire year. So just making sure that you're repeating this process every single season. And then the every 3 to 6 weeks is specifically around grade checks, and just making sure that you're doing check-ins with your kids to make sure that academically, after you've done the initial eligibility determination and you've made sure that their previous semester grades are good, and that they are academically eligible, you want to make sure that you have some sort of a grade check system in place to check on the status of your student athletes as we go. In my previous role as an AD, we checked them 2 to 3 times during a season. So we checked them twice during the season, then once before the postseason if we had teams that were going on, just to make sure that all of our kids were there. And there's some great models out there. As you're taking over, you may be already in your building previously, and so you can lean on the system that the previous AD had. If you don't have a system or don't know where to really start, feel free to reach out to BJ and myself. Feel free to lean on your other colleagues in your league, because everybody pretty much has some sort of system, and it's whatever works for you in particular at your school. Especially for those of you that are in trimesters, it's going to look a little bit different than semesters at certain points of when you're doing those grade checks. So those are the things to keep in mind there. Sam or BJ, anything to add into that?
No. The other thing that can happen in those every 3 to 6 weeks when you're checking academics, you not only want to check their grades, but especially when you have kids that are sort of in that junior and senior year, kids doing running start, doing that kind of stuff, sometimes they drop a class and they didn't tell anybody.
Yeah.
And they become ineligible because they dropped a class. And because a lot of times counselors don't think to tell you, or when they're in running start, they don't have to tell anybody. And so as you're checking those grades, don't just look for Fs, like just be conscious of, are they still taking a full load? Because that can get kids in trouble pretty quick.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point. And I don't, I wasn't in the first training, so I don't know if this got covered, but really make sure that you reach out to your counselors on your campus and make sure that you are very tight with your counselors and your registrar. Those are the 2 people that you really want to make sure that you have good relationships with on your campuses, because those are going to be the people that help you with enrolling and withdrawing students, so that you know the kids that are coming in and out, and with the counselors, like BJ said, especially with running start students, that they can help you make sure that those kids stay eligible and they're not dropping classes that are going to drop them below the standard. So just a few things there. And then the building AD is the gatekeeper for eligibility status and process, and truer words probably cannot be spoken, but you are the person that takes over the eligibility piece, and you are that gatekeeper to whether or not they can compete. And so a couple of things that you want to make sure that you're aware of is the clear to participate. And what that means is just that the students have met your school district legal responsibility for the basic clearance, which is the physicals, any releases that need to be signed. And so in the handbook, it goes through some specific releases that every school district has in place, but then your school district also may have some other releases that have to be signed, whether that's for transportation or for just medical clearance and things like that. So making sure that that you're also working with your school district on updating any of those forms if policies have changed, especially coming out of the year of COVID and still being kind of in the mode of dealing with COVID. You want to make sure that all of those things are updated on your registration website, and that you have all of those forms ready to go. And making sure that all of those boxes are checked as the kids go down through and get registered. So that's going to be the first piece to participate, is just meeting those school district responsibilities. And then the eligible to compete term is meeting our WIAA minimum requirements and the school district requirements, which is the age. They can't be over the age of 20 by specific dates. They have to be a member of your school. You need to be checking for the previous semester. Again, this is something that you really need to pay attention to this coming year, especially coming from COVID. We're getting a lot of questions in our office just about, is there going to be a waiver for grades coming into the fall this year? And all of our waivers ran out as of June 30. And so as we headed into the summertime, and so now we're back to normal operating procedures and policies in the WIAA. So every student has to have a previous semester and they have to meet those minimum standards. There is no waiver at this time. to waive that. And so school districts had an immense amount of flexibility over the course of last school year to adjust grades, to be able to help kids have meet the ability to get their credits. And so with all of that flexibility that was given to the school districts, we felt like there are plenty of opportunities for the district to work with student athletes to help ensure that they are eligible with the previous semester trimester rules coming into this school year. So that's going to be one thing that you really want to make sure is that they took the at least the minimum number of credits and that they pass those grades or pass those classes and are going to be academically eligible to start the school year. And then you want to look at the current semester, like BJ said, with your running start students or your alternative ed students or homeschool students, you want to make sure that they're taking the appropriate number of classes. And we'll go through these forms a little bit later on. And I think BJ is going to walk you through how to fill out the running start form just to make sure that you are double checking the work of your counselors. And again, this is where that relationship with your counselors comes into play, and making sure that these student athletes are taking the right number of classes, whether they're a senior or whether they're a freshman, and just ensuring that they are going to be set up for success as the year goes along. And then season limitations. And I think this is another big one coming out of COVID that a lot of families are going to be asking about. You want to make sure that that the students have not exhausted their season limitations. So if this is a senior coming back for basically their second senior season, they may have already exhausted their limitations. And so you want to make sure that they have not participated or will not be participating in more than their 6 years that are allowed, starting from 7th grade. And so those are a couple of things that you really want to make sure that you're looking out for. And then the physical, again, I go back to that, just ensuring that the physical is up to date. Again, our policy is every 2 years, a new physical has to be done. But your school district may be more restrictive and may require it a year annually. So you want to make sure that you're aware of what your district policy is around physicals, and making sure that the appropriate form is completed and that it's been signed off by one of the medical professionals that are allowed to do physicals. If you get one that comes in from a chiropractor, send it back to the family. So there's some families out there that try to go to their local chiropractor, especially in the more rural communities. If there's not a lot of doctors in the area, they'll try to get that sent in, and chiropractors are not cleared in the state of Washington to perform the physicals by our rules. So that's one other thing to keep in mind. And then the last piece is just the residents, making sure that the students live within your boundaries, your school boundaries. And if they don't, then start asking the questions of, okay, how did you end up here? Or, have you been concurrently enrolled? You've choiced in from previous years. Just making sure that every student that is coming into your gyms or onto your fields are actually students that reside within your school boundaries and are actually members of your school. And so I think that covers it. I'll let BJ and Sam add anything additional. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to Sam.
The only thing I would add is clear to participate and eligible to compete. Those can be two separate lists. Like I always started the year with all these kids are cleared to participate. That means they can practice, they can try to make the team, they can go to the weight room because they've met the legal requirements. But do not let a single kid put on a uniform, be a part of warm-ups, any of that stuff, if they are not on your eligible to compete list. Two separate lists. You can participate and you can compete, two separate things. So just keep that part in mind. The cleared to participate is a few things that we require, but it's mostly your school district. Some people require them to pay their fees before they can participate. Some require them to have an ASP card. Some require them all kinds of stuff. Where you're going to get in trouble is if you let a kid compete that's not eligible to compete. So I just want to be really clear about that.
Yeah, BJ, I think that's a good point. For those of you that haven't had a coaches meeting already, or for those of you that haven't thought about this, we always did a fall or a preseason coaches meeting for every season that we had. And these are two of the lists to go over. So when you're providing that list to your coaches, these are the kids that are cleared and should be allowed out to practice. Is going to be that clear to participate piece. So they can practice if they're, on academic suspension or anything like that. Typically, they can practice unless your school district has that more restrictive policy. But most of the time, they're going to be able to go out and practice and whatnot. But then that's where some of the confusion starts, right? Coaches think, okay, well, the kid's allowed to practice, they can compete as well. You need to make sure that you're constantly communicating with your coaches, especially if they're newer coaches, new to the district or new to the school, making sure that they understand that you're going to be giving them two different lists, and you're going to give them, okay, here's who can be out there, and then you're going to give them the actual roster. I would never place a kid on our roster unless they were eligible to compete. So it was pretty clear to our coaches who was eligible to play and who wasn't. And I would take kids off of the roster if they were academically ineligible after a grade check, and then we'd put them back on there if they once they got eligible again. And so just making sure that you have those two distinct lists, like BJ said, and communicate that with your staff.
Okay, Sam Brown, is there any questions that we can answer real quick, just on just that? Okay, that was a big thing. And Justin talked a little bit about each of those categories. Don't panic. All of that's in our handbook. The information about age, member of school, previous semester, current semester, it's in our handbook. So if you take the time to read that information, it should become a little more clear to you. Sam Brown.
Hello. Good morning, everybody. I just want to say really quick, this is a great year to be an athletic director because the team that you have in eligibility and the team that you have in our office has really taken some time to try to make it as easy as possible, as clear as possible, so that no mess ups are happening. And if they do, pick up the phone and call us, and that's okay. I'd also say, please, if you're not awake yet, listen to this training because BJ and Justin have been in your shoes. And so those are the people to really learn from. They've been athletic directors, and I think that's really unique. And so please take a good listen this morning. I'm your person in the office for appeal process. So when a student appeals to the district level or the state level, I help kind of coordinate that. And I'm a big paperwork person for eligibility as well. So you can lean on me for anything eligibility specific, but those two things most importantly. So I'm here to talk to you about, there's a few different kinds of participants, students that will enter your school, and then there's a few different categories of eligibility that those participants can fall under. So the first and easiest one is the green box. So students who have continual enrollment, so a year over a year of continual enrollment at your school. They could have been there 2, 3, 4 years, but no matter how long they have been there, you still need to check for all of those categories that Justin went through in the eligible to compete and the eligible or cleared to participate categories. So those could be things, even if a kid has been there, don't just assume. Things can change. A physical can expire, so you need to be going through those checklists. Their residence can change, so you might want to have that on file, those kinds of things. Once you go through all those categories for that student who has been in your school for over a year, you can determine them eligible or not, and you're going to store that clearance wherever you do in your system of students that are cleared to compete in your school or eligible to compete. And you're going to do that every 3 to 6 weeks in whatever system you build to do that checking. The yellow box, so the second kind of participant and student that you can have in your school is one similar to the first that's been there for over a year. They have continuous enrollment, but something's changed. They have a change in status. The most common change in status that we see is academics, and those can fall under 3 things. That can be they choose to do running start, they choose to utilize homeschooling, or they have an alternative school that they're accessing. So something like Online Academy or WIAA or something like that. All of those academic statuses can be full-time, and students can be fully eligible to compete if all other things check out. It could be part-time, it can be a mixed kind of schedule. But again, when that happens, if and when you find out that happens with a student, you need to go onto the website, which we're going to do later, and pull whichever academic contract lines up with whatever that change is. So we have a running start contract, an alternative school contract, and a homeschool contract. And that'll help you make sure that the student is eligible, and when you're going through all those clearances in each category, that the academics are lining up to. There are other status changes that can happen. I can't think of one right off the top of my head. I mean, maybe residents, they move, but you want to track that. I'll think of some later. But again, that checking is going to be every 3 to 6 weeks, just like any other student. And then the red box. This is the most common reason that students appeal at the district level and the state level. So I'd say it's about 75% of district cases and about 90% of state level appeal cases fall under the transfer student. So that's a student who is entering your school that has not been there. They don't have the continuous enrollment of 1 full year. And when that happens, you need to utilize the new student packet, which again, you'll see in a little bit. That is a document, it's 4 to 5 pages that is created for you to sit down with the student and family and fill out. It helps you get to know the student. You get a full picture of their academic history, their participation history. All the questions included on that are clear and concise enough that once you get to the end of that student packet, you'll know if they're going to be eligible or not. And so again, once you go through it, you fill out. Later, again, when we go on the website, we have a determination of ineligibility sheet that you will fill out and will show the student if they are eligible or not. And again, that has to happen every 3 to 6 weeks. So once you get the new student packet filled out, that doesn't mean they're just good to go. They have to be included in those checks, just like all the other students in the school. But that's going to be the biggest, most important thing to do as soon as you have a new student come into your school that wants to access athletics. Categories of eligibility. So that's, can a student play? Can a student only play JV, or can they not play at all? So eligible for all levels of competition, that means that that student, when you go through all those categories, they meet the rule in all of those categories. The only students that are eligible for all levels of competition are the students that check the box in all of those categories. Remember that. A student who is not eligible for any level of competition, that means they're not even playing JV. That means they're missing something like a legal requirement on that school district list that Justin went over earlier, which would be, physical. They're not a full-time student and member of your school, or they don't even have a previous semester to work off of. So they're not eligible to compete until they gain those things. Eligible for sub-varsity only, so JV only students, those are usually transfer students that come in and can compete, but cannot compete at the varsity level until they've established 1 full year of continuous enrollment in your school. So it's going to be really important that you make sure you have lists for each of these and you know which student is falling on which list. And then it's, I'd say, even more important that your coaches know that as well. So 3 different kinds of students that can come into your athletic programming and 3 different categories of eligibility that they can fall under. Justin, BJ, what am I missing?
The only thing I was going to add in this yellow group, when kids start getting sort of creative and doing like part-time running start, part-time online, part-time something, remember there's 2 things really important about every single student. They have to be a member of your school somehow. And the only way you can be a member of your school is if they're enrolled in your school. That's 50% of the time or more. So if they are, for some reason, splitting time with, I don't know, let's just say, I'm trying to think of one. They're splitting time with like a private school for some weird reason. They have to be enrolled 50% of the time at your school if they're going to compete at your school. Same thing with homeschool. They have to be enrolled in your school district as a homeschool student. That's what makes kids a member of your school. So if a kid for some reason is let's just say, been going to your school for a long time, and then all of a sudden they decide to enroll at the neighbor school, but they still want to do sports with you because they really like your school and they like your programs, they have to be a member of your school. And secondly, they have to be a full-time student. So when you think about that yellow category, when kids go pick up a couple running start classes, or they're doing online classes or doing homeschool, something awkward, they have to be a full-time student by your standards at your school. If you're a 7-period day, a full-time student is taking 6 out of 7 classes. If you are a 5-period day, they're taking 5, whatever full-time student at your school is, these students have to meet that at a minimum. Okay, pretty important parts of that. Nice work, Sam Brown. Any questions we can answer right here on this part?
And again, don't worry, when you're checking for all those categories that they need to be eligible in, we have a AD checklist that parses those out really clearly. So it's really easy to go through.
Okay, some of these have been covered, but I just wrote this list, like knowing what I know now, if I was you right now, this is what I would do. And this is the priority list that I would do it if I were back in your shoes. I would create, or I would find whatever pre-existing tracking process is for every kid, every sport, every season. You need to keep track of their cleared status. You should pay attention or mark if they quit, if they got cut, because it makes a difference if they practice 10 days, if they went halfway through the season and quit, anything. If they get a varsity letter, a JV letter, like pay attention to all of that. So create a tracking process. I would suggest you keep track of the things I put on there, because that would be very helpful. The second thing I would do is make sure you have an eligibility system to track basically exactly what we just talked through with you. A system that you're going to track who's cleared, who's eligible, and how you're double checking every 3 to 6 weeks. The next thing I would do is go meet with your school registrar and your counseling team, like Justin had just talked about. Make sure you know what their process is for an enrolling and withdrawing kids. One of the saddest things that we hear is a family withdraws from one school, they transfer to another school, they go to do sports, and they find out that they're ineligible, and nobody ever told them. The school leaving didn't tell them, and the school enrolling them didn't tell them. And they're shit out of luck, for lack of a better word. And they don't get to play varsity sports their senior year. And they didn't have any ulterior motive in any of this. They had a situation that made sense to them, and nobody stopped and talked to them. So it's super duper sad. So it's vital that you are finding out how you can catch kids on the withdrawal or the enroll so they don't get caught. You should understand what their process is for scheduling kids, what their process is for allowing kids to take less than a full load, to drop classes, to sign up for Running Start. Determine how you collaborate with Running Start contracts, alternative ed contracts, and ask how you can navigate your student information system. When I was an AD, we had Skyward as our student system. I figured out how to run some reports. So every 3 weeks, I had an academic report that I could run, and it would pop into my inbox. So use those smart skills that are out there to figure out how you can use those systems to help you. My first couple of years, I hand looked up every single kid every 3 to 6 weeks. That takes a long time in a 4A high school with hundreds of participants. So I would just encourage you to figure out how to be smart with that. Number 4, be sure you know how to identify any student that's new to your school, not taking a full load or failing. Like, what are you going to see when you look so you know and you're triggered by that? Read our handbook, especially read our eligibility paperwork. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Reach out to the eligibility team, Justin, Sam, and I. But I would encourage you to try to solve your problem first. That's how you're going to learn it. So if you have a question, dive into the handbook, see if you can find the answer. Do your best to say, I think this is the answer, and then call us and say, this is what I did, and this is what I think it is. And then let us help you so you don't mess it up if you want. But just know that we're here to help you. Please don't hesitate. But I think the best way for you to learn is to try to solve it first. And then the last thing is you will make a mistake, and it's okay. If you play an ineligible player, you do have to self-report. So just know you have to do that if you break one of the rules, but it's okay. You're going to do it. Every AD's done it. I had a handful of them myself. It's just going to happen. So don't panic, reach out, and we will help you if something happens. Okay. Any questions on this document that I could answer at this time? I'm happy to answer them. Okay, sorry, this is kind of fire hose activity. So now we're gonna bump over to our WIAA website. On our website, this is the forward facing, basically for parents and people who want to view our website. This is the forward facing, WIAA.com. Your families and your parents can go to resources, Student Eligibility Center. They can basically see the same things you can see on my WIAA. This is sort of geared towards parents to answer their questions, but this is where they can find the same things you can find. So you can, but they just can't get to my WIAA. On my WIAA, we are going to give you more and more cheat sheets and things to help you navigate it that we don't want on the front end. So we're still evolving that. Okay. So I'm just going to kind of show you this because this is where you can send parents. Resources, Student Eligibility Center. Because you're going to have parents that are going to say, hey, I've got a hardship and I want to fight this. You can say, great, if you go in here, here's where all the forms are. Sounds like you have a harassment, intimidation, and bullying hardship. They can pull up their language and they can start to look at what do I need to do to prove that I have a hardship for harassment, intimidation, and bullying. So you can kind of help parents navigate this. Okay. Keep in mind, parents should be communicating to you. They shouldn't be calling us because we're going to send them back to you. It is okay because I will also tell you this. Sometimes you've told a parent 7 times and that your answer is not good enough. It's okay to send them to us and say, here, go ahead, call the eligibility team. They can confirm for you. That's okay too. It helps if you give us a heads up so we know that you've sort of sent them our way. But we do want parents to work through you because you may have more restrictive rules than we have. So for me to say, oh yeah, you'll be eligible. Your physical was good for 24 months, but then your school requires 12 months. So we will not give parents a lot of things. We'll just kind of tell them what the rules are and encourage them to go back to you. Okay.
BJ, one thing to just add in there is that for all of you to know that we will never tell, the 3 of us will never tell a parent that their student will be cleared or will be eligible. We always point them back to the school and tell them that the school, as an athletic director, you make the determination of eligibility or ineligibility. We never give them an interpretation to say, yes, your student's cleared. We say that we may say that it appears that you're meeting, they could be meeting the rule, but we will never put you into that position of saying, yeah, your AD is completely wrong and you're clear, because we don't know, like BJ said, we don't know what your district standards are in some cases. And so I just want to make sure that's clear, that if a parent comes back to you and says that they were told by the WIAA that their student is clear, that's not going to be coming from the 3 of us.
Okay, I'm going to log into my WIAA. So it's easy to do it. You can click the link right on the homepage there. Takes a second. Hopefully you guys have all gotten into my WIAA. You've all kind of dinked around a little bit, figured out how to do some things. I don't know if your guys' is as slow as mine is, but mine's always pretty slow to log in.
Mine's pretty slow.
Okay. So when you get here, this is your landing page, assuming you've already spent some time there, which is great. Eligibility is on the green bar right here. Before I go into that, I want to make sure you know where the handbook is. We don't print the handbook. So this is where you find the WIA handbook under resources. And I don't know if anybody has shown you the trick, but when you open up the handbook, you can go straight to eligibility and look in this space so you don't have to navigate. But let's say somebody comes to you and says, I have a 8th grader that wants to participate. You know, you have the Control F where you can have it pop up and you put in 8th grade. That's a really bad example. Somebody says to you, I'm coming from a private school. So you punch in private school and you can see that we have 19 places in the handbook where we talk about private school. Because one thing that's really cool about our handbook is we have all the language, but then in the back of the book, we have Q&As, and the Q&As are almost more helpful than the words in the book. So by punching in the topic, it gives you the opportunity to see the Q&As. So when you open the entire book, and this is last year's book, so I just want to mention that, but you can do Control F and you could put, I'm going to put transfer in. That's probably a bad word because it's going to be in there 86 times. But as you go through, I want to show you in the very back of the book, I'm just going to click on it. There are Q&As back here. And these Q&As will help you work through a bunch of those questions. So these are organized by what rule it is. So physical exam, if you have a question about a physical exam, you can come look at the Q&As, summer activities, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a great way for when you have an issue you can't solve, punch it up there in the corner and scan through the book and try to find every place that we've made reference to that. Okay. So back to our website. Eligibility, if you click on eligibility, this looks a lot like what the parents can see. Yours just has a little bit more in it. On the resources tab, this is where you can find the eligibility checklist that Sam talked about.
It's in two places here. So it's right there, but then it's also when you get into the steps of receiving a new student, it's listed under AD checklist. So we listed there a bunch of times for you.
So if you want to be like over diligent, you could have this sheet of paper for every single student every season, if you really wanted to. Like this is the comprehensive did. So if I printed this and I wrote little Justin Kesterson right here in the student name, what day did he enroll in our school? I just fill this out. Is he a member of our school? Yep, he meets the rule. Does he meet our, does he have a valid physical? Is he under the age of 20? And I can go, whoops, he's over the age of 20, according to our information. I need more information. So I could click the need more information because maybe I want to go back and talk to little Justin Kesterson to see if he really is trying to play high school sports at 40 years old. So you go through each of these. We have the rules here. And then you can do this for every kid every season. Now that's a little much, but that is in essence what you should be doing. And until you get really good at it, it just might take you a little bit more time, but this is what you're looking for every kid, every season. Okay. Sorry, Justin, you're 36. You're close. Okay. So, the next couple, this protect your eligibility is a document that was made a while ago, but that's just a good resource you could use if you wanted to with your families. Residency, this is a form that if you have a family that has moved and you want to kind of talk about residency expectations, this is a form. It's something that was created quite a while ago, but that's available to you. If you have an exchange student, these are two documents, one if they're coming to the United States and one if they're leaving. So these are two documents you'll want to use. We mentioned before you enroll and before you withdraw, I'd encourage you, if you can make this happen with your registrar, that in their new student packet, before they enroll a student, you put this before you enroll document in there. That'll trigger them to ask some questions. And every school typically has a before you withdraw packet that families have to do. They have to go get signatures and they got to go do all this stuff. If they could put this before you withdraw document in that packet, it will help you trigger kids and get contacted. And basically what these say is, did you participate? Do you plan to participate? And if they answer yes, they should just direct them right to you before they do anything. That's what those are intended to do.
PJ, I'd say just to emphasize those two one more time. So if a student doesn't have the opportunity to fill that paperwork out, or you don't have the opportunity to do that with a student, and they end up being ineligible because they didn't have that information, when they go to appeal their eligibility, saying, I didn't know, will not give them eligibility. So again, that's responsibility. And I really encourage you to utilize those two pieces of paper because it'll avoid that if those are filled out for those students.
Thanks, Sam. These three contracts, home-based ed, alternative ed, and running start contract are vital. So as soon as you find out a kid is not a full-time student and they are getting some academics somewhere outside of your schoolhouse, one of these contracts is required. So you have to have a contract on file. The most probably difficult one ends up being the running start contract. The thing I'm going to emphasize, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but this is what I want to emphasize. This running start contract or academic, any of these contracts, they look the same. You should fill it out for the entire school year. Don't fill it out semester by semester, trimester by trimester. You fill it out one time for the whole year, because now when a kid drops a class, does something that they're not supposed to do in that area, you have the full documentation of what their full plan was. Teaching you how to fill this out is probably another little session that we would all do together. And so we'll try to maybe set that up, or I'll make a video and get that out to you for how to fill this out. But this is a fairly common mistake. But I'll tell you, if you trust A, B, C, D, E, and F at the bottom, that will walk you through it. You don't need me to walk you through it. If you will follow these 5 steps, you'll be just fine. But I would recommend that you find a list of every kid that participated last year and the year before, and start watching for who's choosing to do running start this year. So you can try to meet with them, whether they're doing a fall sport or not. Try to meet with every kid that's doing running start that is planning on doing sports. So those 3 documents are super duper important. This is just in case you have a kid that needs to appeal. Down here at the bottom, this certificate of eligibility, if you don't have a good checklist, this is a nice simple one you can use, where you list everybody's name, did they meet it or not, each of these categories. And so that's kind of a nice way. You are required to have a list of everybody eligible. And so some people use something like this. Some people make up a Google one or do it their own way, but you are required to have this list. And this is just a sample of how you can do that. Down here, let's see what else is here. We have some information about McKinney-Vento. So if you have some students that are McKinney-Vento and you're not sure what to do, you can open up this document and just read through it, just so you're aware. Okay, any questions on this part? Okay. The new student athlete. So anytime you have a kid that you determined was not a member of your school or your feeder school last year that transferred into your school, for one reason or another, you need to engage with this new student packet, okay? So mostly you're looking at this new student packet is for 10th, 11th, and 12th graders, because we have this rule and it's new. It's called the window of transfer. So an incoming 9th grader in our state can basically go to any school they want as long as the school will take them, and they will not be penalized in eligibility. So those kids we call window of transfer. So an incoming 9th grader that uses the natural break between middle school and high school, they can go anywhere they want. But if they choose your school and it's not their resident school, you want them to fill out this window of transfer form. Okay, so as you're noticing, a kid was not in your school system last year, so they didn't go to your junior high or middle school and they're not part of that. If you're a private school person, you need to do this with every incoming 9th grader because they are not choosing to be at their resident public school. Okay. And basically what they're doing is they're acknowledging that they are not going to their resident school, because if they decide that the grass is greener somewhere else and they don't want to be at your school anymore and they want to transfer, we have some, it's harder for them than it is for kids that are in their resident public school. Okay. Otherwise, you have a kid that is a 10th, 11th, or 12th grader that is transferring to your school. You need to complete this document, even if you know that their entire family moved from Kansas and it's 100% legit and you know that, you still need all of this information because you need to know what sports they participated in, how many years have they participated, especially post-COVID when there are families that think they can do a thing called reclassifying and that they think they can repeat 11th grade because their 11th grade year was a COVID year. There's families that think they can do that. So there's going to be families that will probably move from other states and try to say, my kid's a junior when really he's a senior. So you have to have this information. It's, as Sam said earlier, this is intended for you to fill out collaboratively with the family. If you're a brand new AD and you might feel a little overwhelmed about asking these questions And why am I even asking this question when families start asking you 100 questions about the questions? So if you have one of these coming up and you want to walk through it with one of us, reach out, let us know. We will also make a little how-to video, try to keep it short so you can kind of get the feel of what it is you're working on in each of these forms, okay? And what we're helping you do is try to answer all the questions you need for that checklist to make a determination of eligibility, okay? We have in here the, basically anytime you get a new kid, they're considered a transfer student. And so the only way they can be eligible is if they meet one of these on the transfer page. They have to meet A, C, D, F. They have to meet one of these. So one of them is that the transfer is based on a bona fide change of residence. So like that's one of the ways you could become eligible, is if your entire family moved from Kansas. That sort of makes sense, right? There's also the ability for them, if their parents or legal guardians had a legal divorce or legal separation, for them to switch from mom to dad or dad to mom. There's also, if they're sort of a ward of the state or in the foster system, there's some ability for them to gain eligibility. This is the window of transfer, and then the other two are around exchange program. So even if a family said, yes, we moved from Kansas, that's great. So they maybe are going to meet that, but not until you have proof. So there is this residency information piece where you have to get 3 pieces of proof that they actually moved from Kansas. So you have to have proof that they vacated their previous residence, that they moved into the current residence, and that they changed their addresses. So you have to get proof of that before you're going to declare them eligible. So you may complete all this and just say, I need more information. You're going to be ineligible until I can get the rest of this.
Hey, BJ, can we pause and answer a question here?
You bet.
Hey,
Thanks for-
Janika, you want to clarify what you're asking? Let's figure it out for you.
Yeah, so I have a kid whose parent is gonna be at our teaching at our school now, and the child is gonna be moving over as well. So with the parent filled out a form, but we were kind of not sure if it's the same because the child is moving to the school where the parent is gonna be working.
Good question. Do you know what grade the student is in?
I believe they're a sophomore, but I'll have to double check.
So if they're going into 9th grade, we would call them a window of transfer. If any other grade, they're going to be treated as a transfer student. And based on that little tiny bit of information you told me, they would be sub-varsity only for 1 calendar year forward in any sport they did backwards 1 calendar year, if that makes sense. So if
Yes,
they
it does.
enroll in your school on August 1st for easy math, you're going to look back to last August 1st of 2020, and any sport that they participated in, they will be sub-varsity only until next August 1st. Okay, so
Got
that was like a very simple answer to a complex issue. But if they played, let's just say it's a girl and she played volleyball, basketball, she transfers to your school and now she wants to play soccer, that's fine. But she would be sub-varsity for volleyball and basketball for a very simple answer. JK?
Yeah, I was just going to add that's a great example of where you can go and look at the Q&A in the back of the book, because that specific example of where a parent is working at a school and the student transfers over there, that's one of our Q&As, because that one comes up quite a bit, where either the parent is an employee at the school or they are coaching at the school and the student wants to go to that school as well. So there's a specific Q&A around that question. So that's a good place to reiterate using the Q&As to search for some of those answers.
Right. And that's a great question just to kind of throw out, because it's fairly straightforward. So thanks for throwing that out. And again, if they don't have sub-varsity, Courtney, that's also a great question. Unfortunately, it's just too bad. That's my short answer. So they can practice. Obviously, they can be on the cleared to participate list and practice till they're blue in the face. They just cannot put on a uniform and compete if you don't offer a sub-varsity.
Yeah, lack of programming, whether that's school-based or sport-based, does not constitute a hardship either to appeal that necessarily.
Yeah. And the one thing I'll add to Janiqua's question is once you declare that kid as ineligible for varsity competition, they may have a hardship, which is why the kid is moving with the mom, and they can go through the appeal process if they feel like they meet the definition of a hardship. And one of the hardest things that an AD has to do is really help families understand if their situation potentially meets hardship or not. So if they say, well, I just didn't like the teachers, or I don't know, I got picked on by a group of kids, there's just some real fine lines whether it meets the definition of a hardship or not. Okay, so you fill out the new student packet, use the AD checklist to help you with that. That's step one, get it all filled out. Step two, make sure you send the previous school statement to the previous school, because what the previous school statement is going to do is it's going to confirm or deny what the family just told you. So if there happens to be a family that's fibbing about something, you hope that it will pop up in the previous school statement. There are some specific questions about if the student was still at the previous school, would they be limited in their eligibility? So maybe the kid was going to be on athletic code suspension for the first 3 games and they transfer to your school. They think they don't have to serve that. So that's why it's super important you're working with the previous school to get the full picture. Maybe the kids said that they were fully happy at the previous school, but their family unit moved. And then you find out the previous school, they had a great big huge problem and the parents were creating havoc. And so it's just really important. The other place that's really important is to confirm participation, especially with COVID. There might be families, like I said, trying to reclassify, and they may not put in their full participation. Okay, in Washington, you get 6 consecutive years beginning in 7th grade. So you're always looking back to 7th grade. So make sure your middle schools, if you're a middle school person or you're connected to a middle school, that they're keeping tight records 7 through 12. Okay, previous school statement gets sent off, you get that back. Then you get the updated transcript. So you have to get step 1, step 2, step 3. Please don't just accept some progress report from last spring. You need to make sure it's the official transcript that you're looking at. Once you get all that, then your job is to make a decision. Do they meet eligibility? Do they not meet eligibility? And this is where the rubber hits the road and you have to make a decision. If they're eligible, great. Put them on the list, give them a high five, welcome them to your school, ready to go. If they don't meet eligibility, then you have to determine them as ineligible. So you have to fill out this form and you have to provide this to the family. Basically, you're going to regurgitate some information. And then you are going to say you are ineligible for all competition. So let's just say they didn't even have a previous semester, like they dropped out of school last year. Now they showed up. They're not going to be eligible until they get a previous semester. So they are completely ineligible for everything right now. Or you're going to say you transferred, your family didn't move, you are ineligible for varsity. Using Janiqua's situation, you are ineligible for varsity, but you can compete at the sub-varsity. Then you can figure out which rule made the decision. So if you were Janiqua, you would maybe circle the transferring student, and the notice you would just say, based on rule 18.11.0, the student transferred schools without meeting any of the transfer rules, no family unit move, any of those things. So that's why they're ineligible. You're going to hand them the document that says, do you understand you have 3 school business days to request a hearing? They're going to say, yep. I provided them the eligibility appeal packet. Yes, on this day, boom. And if you want to make it to one of our hearings, the next one is on August 15th. So we need the paperwork by August 10th if you'd like to be in the next eligibility hearing. So you could fill that out. Sometimes families say, fine, I'm happy to be sub-varsity for a year. We don't care. My kid's not very good anyways, so be it. So then they check we just accept the status. That's fine, I get it. And then everybody signs it and we move on. If the family is very insistent, if Janiqua's family is very insistent that they have a hardship and they want to fight it, that's fine. At this point, it becomes up to the family to do what they need to do next. Okay, so the determination and eligibility is where you said, sorry, you're not eligible. Boom. And now the family has to do the paperwork they need to do, become eligible. That's not all right here on this page, FYI, Sam. Is that intended to be that way?
I believe so. It's all on the front facing page though, so we can make that.
So I'm going to
yeah.
pop over to WIAA.com, resources, student eligibility. So you just broke that family's heart and said your kid's ineligible for varsity. And they say, we're not happy with that. We want to fight that. You say, okay, great. Step one, they have to request an appeal. So they're going to, and you should help them with this. So when you're meeting with the family and saying, I'm sorry, you're ineligible, and they say, I want to fight it, that's great. Open this up and help them fill this out right away. Okay. This is basically them saying, I understand a whole bunch of stuff and I'm going to go get all these paperwork put together for you. And then the family hopefully is going to explain to you that they were harassed, intimidated, and bullied at their previous school. That's why they need to move. That's why they meet the hardship. So you're going to open up harassment, intimidation, and bullying, and you're going to help them fill this out. Well, they're going to fill it out, but you're going to coach them. If it's a medical reason, a mental reason, if it's a financial reason, that's mostly involving private schools, but not always. Season limitations is when kids have ran out of years of eligibility, but they haven't graduated and they want to try to get an additional year. And then general, we get them once in a while that they just don't meet any of them. An example of that would be this last year, we had some private schools that took a really strong stance against gay teachers in their building. And so there were some kids that wanted to leave the school because their values didn't line up with the school's values any longer. So that would be an example of just using a general hardship packet, because that's not harassment, it's not medical, it's not financial, it's not season limitations. So there's just weird general ones. All of the paperwork looks the same in terms of we will consider waivers for these things. We don't waive for these things. And they have to, as a family, have a direct relationship between why they're ineligible and why they have a hardship. So an example might be if a kid was harassed, intimidated, and bullied. Let's just say that happened in 7th grade and they went to counseling in 7th grade and they got it all sorted out with the school. But now it's 11th grade and you just told them they're ineligible. And so they're going to go back and use harassment, intimidation, and bullying from 7th grade as their reason. And so that wouldn't necessarily line up. It was from a long time ago, so it doesn't quite line up. So that's a kind of an odd example of what that means. And then this just kind of says, these are the things that they have to provide us. And here's the paperwork to do it. Every hardship appeal requires a student statement, requires a family statement. Typically, one of the parents will fill this out, and requires proof. You have to have proof. We typically say 3 pieces of proof, and the proof cannot, they need to have 3 pieces of proof that are can prove their case. So if they are using harassment, intimidation, and bullying, there should be proof that they worked with the school. So maybe there's some email strings with the principal. Maybe there is text messages that they can print and provide. So there's a lot of different ways that they could provide some proof of that. But in eligibility hearings, they won't just take a family and a kid's word for something. There has to be some proof. Okay, so once the family gets this packet put together, you can help them get onto a district eligibility appeal board. So just to kind of take one step back, every school is basically a member of a league, and every league is a member of a WIAA district. There's 9 of them. Your WIAA district has an eligibility chairperson. that will help with all these appeals. So they set up the appeal hearings. They communicate with you about deadlines and dates and all that. So I'll send out a follow-up email with this link for this video, and I'll attach a list of all the eligibility chairs so you know who to contact. And so that way, if you anticipate one of these coming, you'll know who to get a hold of. Okay. We also have some Q&As on this website around eligibility as well. Sam or Justin, anything you think is important to touch base on this? This can be real fire hosey kind of stuff, so I'm trying not to overwhelm you.
No, I would also say if you have a question, and especially around the appeal process at the district level, get comfortable calling your district eligibility chairperson. So find out who that is. They're ready to answer questions and ready to help you out too. But we are always here for that. JK hopped off, BJ.
Yeah, okay. Okay, it's Q&A time, friends. Hopefully, I would say you can go back to that document I threw in the chat, and I will send it out via email anyways. Do some of those items, get comfortable with the eligibility stuff, get yourself prepared to have a checklist, and then just start working it and reach out when you can't solve a problem. So any other questions that we could answer specifically on student eligibility?
Can I ask a question on academic eligibility?
You bet.
We've been debating trying to figure out if it's more beneficial to look at semester grades or quarter grades. And like we just have experienced or are worried about kids trying to work the system by going on semester grades. Because we've had kids that, you can get straight A's your first quarter. And so your semester grade is an A. And then as soon as your winter sport picks up, you just kind of take a seat out of the classroom and just kind of let that A ride as long as possible. Do you have any opinions on that or anything like that?
Right. So when you think about academic eligibility, there's kind of two pieces. One of them is you always have to look at the previous semester. So like right now, you guys have to go back and look at last spring.
Right.
Make sure they took enough, passed enough, everything.
Mhm.
But once the school year starts, you should be checking every 3 to 6 weeks the most current grades. So don't just wait for a quarter. There should be some progress reports that are happening, because typically quarters are 5 to 6 weeks, 5.5 weeks, something like that. I would encourage you to have some sort of system that's a progress report system in the middle. So you're really doing it about every 3 weeks. You're doing a progress report system. One of the things I did as an AD, it did take probably a little bit more work, but any kid from the previous semester that had a D or an F, I put them on my watch list, and they had to come and bring me grades every single week. And if they could get into a situation where I didn't see anything but A's, B's, or C's, I let them stop doing that. But any kid that I was seeing D's or F's, they had to come say hi every week and check in with their teachers and provide me progress. So that's on you in terms of how you do that, but make sure every 3, I would encourage 3, but anytime in that 3 to 6 weeks, you are checking the most current grades.
Well, and we do weekly grade checks.
Right.
And I'm talking about what you base that decision on. Are you looking at the semester grade, or are you looking at the quarter grade to do it? Like the current quarter grade or the current semester grade?
You're looking at the current grade, whatever it is. I'm not sure I'm helping you, but I wouldn't get so hooked up on quarter or semester. Use semester to look at the previous.
Right.
But once the school year starts, look at the most current. And if you had a quarter grade that was like a week ago, that would be super reasonable that you're doing that. But even quarter grades, most educators would tell you those are sort of progress reports as well. They don't carry any weight. The only thing that carries weight are your semester trimesters. Does that help you?
I have a question with the academic eligibility as well.
Okay.
I do have an incoming 9th grader who previous semester didn't meet our district standards. So I think the answer is he's going to be ineligible, but I noticed in the WIA handbook, it says under 18.7.6a that in the fall, an incoming 9th grade student is not required to meet the previous scholarship rule. So can you explain that in case my parent comes back and says, well, WIA says this, when our district says he has to meet a 2.0 and he didn't have that?
It's a great question. That's a good example that you can be more restrictive than we are. Same thing with physicals, same thing with academics. There's a lot of schools that have higher academic standards than what is in our handbook. So that's just on you guys, and you guys get to say, hey, this is, and it's written in our handbook multiple places. You might even use my little, go open up the handbook and search the word restrictive, and you might find several examples where we say that you can be more restrictive than we are. So that's okay.
And when we get those calls from parents in the office, we say, please remember, our handbook serves as a minimum for requirements. Schools and school districts always have the ability to be more restrictive. So that's what we also say back to parents.
Yeah. And that can honestly be in just about any category. And keep in mind, let's just say at Ashley's school, if you have a code violation, you lose 6 basketball games. But at Cameron's school, a code violation, you miss 3 basketball games. So the kid transfers from Ashley's school to Cameron's school. He still has to serve Ashley's penalty, because that penalty goes with them no matter what Cameron's school's penalty is. So keep that in mind. If somebody comes to you with a penalty from the other school, you have to honor that. Best online system to keep track of eligibility status. The best ones I have seen are using a Google spreadsheet, sharing that with your coaches. Don't let them edit it, only let them view it. Have a category for eligible to participate and a category for eligible to compete. Maybe a category that says academics checked, and you can put a little date in there so they can follow along. You can color code the kids. I have found some really great people's use of Google spreadsheet on that. So your coaches can view it. They can view it live anytime. Keep in mind, if you use something like Final Forms or whatever for eligibility, please remember that that is not all inclusive of all of the rules. It's going to help you with some of them. It's going to help give you some information, but it is not all inclusive. And that's why we're really trying to emphasize there's 7 categories. You got to check them all for every kid every season. Final Forms can help you, or whatever online system you're using, that can help you, but it is not all inclusive.
I just dropped, it's also on our website, but we provide a certificate of eligibility for the school, and it just kind of helps parse out those categories if you're building a spreadsheet for yourself.
Right. And you can put little things like in a Google spreadsheet that your coaches can see that might have like needs to do a weekly grade check. So you highlight them yellow so all your coaches know that kid needs to come in once a week and check. Or you can make a note that you're waiting for a running start contract. That's why they're eligible, so the coaches know that's what's holding them up. So sometimes you can put a little bit of information in there. I wouldn't put like out for a drug violation, because that would be a little bit too public, but you know, you could put a different kind of note there. So great questions. Don't hesitate, ask questions, because you guys are all, if you're thinking it, somebody else in this call is thinking it as well. So feel free to ask it.
BJ, I have a question for you.
Okay.
So I have a kid who their family moved into our district at the beginning of 2019, but they stayed at a different school because they weren't sure that we were going to have sports at that time.
Yep.
So they didn't want to transfer schools, not be able to play for a year and then have that count against them.
Yep.
So they stayed at their school, ended up having sports and played. And now they're wanting to academically transfer to our school because they moved, and they think that they're going to be eligible because they actually moved their family, but that was 2 years ago instead of just recently. Does that still make them sub-varsity status?
That's another really great example. We do have some Q&As about that. That comes up once in a while. In our language, it suggests or says that in order to be eligible, the transfer of schools have to happen at the time of the move.
Okay.
There's a little reasonability to that. Like, let's say for some reason they sold their house and they transferred with like 1 week in the semester. And so they're just going to finish the semester and get there. Like, that's reasonable, but a whole semester is not reasonable. A whole year is definitely not reasonable. So based on what you told me, I would think we're going to have a determination of subvarsity only. If they feel like they have a hardship, and based on what you told me, I'm not hearing hardship. Like, hardship means very unique, specific to that family. That doesn't happen to anybody else. Everything you told me sounds like a choice that they made to make sure that kid got to do what they sort of wanted them to do. But I don't know the whole story. So there could be a hardship in there, but based on what you told me, I hear choice.
Right. And that's where I was leaning. It's just, I didn't know with, the COVID year of not knowing that there was going to be sports, if that carried any weight with it, but it doesn't really sound like it does. So
no, our board supported the interpretation pretty early on that COVID in and of itself is not a hardship. Could a family have a hardship as a result of COVID? Yes. So a specific family maybe lost their home due to being out of work. And so COVID really specifically impacted this family. That might be a hardship. But COVID in and of itself impacted everybody, and everybody's avenue to get to athletics and academics was impacted pretty similarly. Whether your school was in person or online, your entire student body was impacted by that. So it's not unique to a kid or unique to a situation. So that's where you guys have to really help people find that fine line of what's a hardship and what is not.
okay.
And just know, COVID in and of itself is not, even though
Right.
a lot of parents are upset about that. It's a good question.
The word choice can be really used as a flag for you too. So anytime you hear a family kind of say something along the lines of, well, we decided to do this, or we chose to do this. I saw a question come through the chat that a family chose to go to a different school rather than their resident public school, and they're wanting to come back now. They made a choice. So anytime you hear the word choice, that should be a flag for you to really look into the whole picture and the whole story.
And one of my other recommendations might be like just using that example that, we've gotten a couple of good examples. It's easy for me to say to you guys, based on what that you told me that sounds this way, I would encourage you when you're working with families to make sure they know that until you have all of the pieces, you really don't know. So for you to say, oh yeah, you're going to be eligible, just fill out this paperwork. And then you find out from the previous school that there was something that they didn't tell you. And then you have to go back on that. So I just really encourage you to not get people's hopes up. One of the words that we use around eligibility is to not get anybody's expectations up. So, wait until you have all the information. Just tell parents, like, let's sit down, let's go through all this until I can see the transcript. And then sometimes you'll say, we have this kid and they moved from Cincinnati and we can't get the transcript. Can the kid play? I would say, no, I'm like, just hang tight and be patient. This is worth being diligent because you just don't know what you're going to get when you unpeel all of the layers. Same thing goes when another school sends you a previous school statement. Please do your best to fill that out and get that sent back right away. And if you're not sure where to find the information because you're a new AD, reach out to that AD and say, hey, I'm brand new. I'm trying to find the information, just so they know. Any other questions? We don't like to keep you too long, but this is an opportunity that you get to have to ask us anything that you might want.
A great way to learn more about the eligibility process and just eligibility in general is to get on your district eligibility committee if that's something of interest to you. But warm bodies and smart minds are always needed on those committees. So it is helpful though, and really gives you a good picture of what the whole process is like to be a part of those committees.
And at every fall workshop, we're doing eligibility committee trainings. And just so you know, those are for the people intending to sit on a committee. But if you want to sit in and just listen, you are welcome to do that. It's just a kind of a way to absorb. Obviously, at fall workshop, there's going to be a lot of information as well, sort of like these are, but that is another space for you to gain some information. Okay. Sounds like we have covered it all. I'm going to stop the recording and then